This is the Bama Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today I am joined by Josh, Bossé, and Qohelet herself to look deeply at the roots of evil.
Yes, today we are looking at the other side of the coin. Last chapter was all about oppression and solidarity, and now we are looking at where that need for solidarity and liberation against oppression comes from. How do we get there? And to go back to Qohelet's, the new question that arose all the way back in chapter 3, how do we actually arrive at any kind of spiritual progress when we see so much evil around us? And how do we use that to anchor our identity as something more than animals? But before we jump in, as always, got to open with this warning. Got to remind us, we are doing non-abstract philosophy. Quite a thing to wrap our head around. We are looking at material reality. We are looking at human experience. We are not relying on traditional theology to give us answers or assumptions. We are testing these things against our actual material human experience, and we're using that experience to reason. And we have to also remember that Qohelet is constantly demonstrating her rationale through concrete metaphors. When she says she turns to look at something, that is telling us that she is actually turning, her gaze is shifting, there's a new perspective, and she is looking at something, asking us to look at something that we really see, think about how we see it in real life, all those things. And with that, let's jump into the text of Qohelet chapter 5.
Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. Go near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools who do not know that they do wrong. Do not be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. God is in heaven and you are on earth, so let your words be few. A dream comes when there are many cares, and many words mark the speech of a fool. When you make a vow to God, do not delay to fulfill it. He has no pleasure in fools. Fulfill your vow. It is better not to make a vow than to make one and not fulfill it. Do not let your mouth lead you into sin, and do not protest to the temple messenger, my vow was a mistake. Why should God be angry at what you say and destroy the work of your hands? Much dreaming and many words are meaningless. Therefore, fear God.
Wow. A little bit all over the place, huh?
Yeah, in this chapter, I feel like there's not a whole lot that is otherwise familiar. Up to this point, there's always been at least like one, overly quoted, overly taken out of context, overly proof texted portion of the chapter. But this one, there's not really so much, except that last little bit of verse 2 throws me back to a Rebecca St. James song.
Yes.
Let my words be few. I assume that's where this comes from. They could be somewhere else in the text, but I think it's from here.
It's probably here. Although it does have the ring of something that could appear elsewhere in wisdom literature.
Yeah, and there's lots of stuff in here where it's like, oh, is this familiar because it's actually a familiar portion of Ecclesiastes, or is it just the general refrain of meaninglessness and whatever else?
Yes. Honestly, that was one of the biggest struggles going through this, is there is a lot of repetition internally, and then sometimes it's just stuff you've heard elsewhere, and it might be an intentional remez. Who knows? There is so much here. One of the things that I have learned reading this is that there is so much more in Qohelet than I know what to do with. But hopefully we'll tease this a little bit apart. But I want to own up to something first, which is that, we talked about looking into the very roots of evil, and, stacked up to the oppression that we saw in the beginning of the last chapter. This feels a bit underwhelming, right? Don't make hasty vows. What does this have to do with oppression? What's this about dreams? And what does this have to do with where we left off, And first, what I would like to do is remind us that in the last chapter, there was an extensive Yosef remez, as well as a remez to David. And if we look closely in this opening salvo, we have a couple clear references. The first to me is right in verse 1. We have, I think, a very clear reference to David's story, or more specifically, right before David's story, where in 1 Samuel chapter 15:22, we have Samuel saying, does the Lord have as much delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? It's better to obey than sacrifice, and to pay attention is better than the fat of rams. And this is Samuel, of course, talking to Saul, not David. And I wonder if this is contrasted with David, because the opening verse in Ecclesiastes, to guard your steps as you go to the house of God, it feels like that might be reminiscent of how seriously David takes God's decisions. I guess what I'm referring to specifically is the death of Uzziah, when they are taking the ark back from the Philistines, and someone touches it and instantly dies. David says, well, okay, hello, sir, whose house is nearby. Will you hang on to this? I'm going to leave it right here until I triple check that I'm good with God before I bring it back to God's house.
Yeah.
But then after that, I forget if your translation translated this the same way, but immediately after, Ecclesiastes says, guard your steps as you go to the house of God. It says, approach to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools. And
yes,
when I was reading that quote from 1 Samuel, when they use the word obey, it's better to obey the voice of the Lord than to sacrifice. That word for obey is shamoah, same root as shema, to listen. So it's better to obey God and approach than just to try and offer a sacrifice, just give him a bunch of rams. Don't think about it. Like, no, God would rather have your attention and for you to actually listen. So I think this opening verse is a very clear reference to Saul and David. Remind me again, Brent, how did your translation go with that last line in verse 1? So I've seen lots of different takes on it.
Well, yeah, who do not know that they do wrong.
That's how NASB has it as well. For they do not know that they are doing evil. And I've seen some translations who put it as they do not know how to do evil, which, could also have like another slight bent on it. And I think, there's depth to be gained from either translation. I'm not good enough in the Hebrew, and enough people who are good at the Hebrew don't know what to do with it, to the point where I'm, just going to hold my hands up and let people do what they want with it. But I think that this is, especially given the direction we're taking this chapter in, we're looking at evil. What an interesting image to pull David and Saul, and to remind us that, Saul did not think he was doing evil. Maybe he should have. Maybe he was not paying attention, didn't have his priorities straight. But it's not that he was trying to, spit in the face of God or anything like that. And reminding us that the roots of evil, we often hear it said, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Like, we're aware of this. But I feel like, especially in the church, it's very, very easy for us to use our religious identity to exempt ourselves from closer inspection of our actions, because they're done in the name of God. And that's true for probably everyone. I certainly know that I've been guilty of that in my past. And I dare say it's something that, at least in the Western American church, is a very good thing for us to sit with. That just because you are giving things to God, just because you are sacrificing things to God, does not mean you are listening to or obeying God, and you may not even be aware of the evil that you are doing. So, a good place to start So then we have verse 2 to not be quick with our words. And what's interesting about this is the word for being quick with, in this case, is a word for trembling. And so we could imagine, maybe King Saul, trying to make excuses or come up with a reason why he didn't mean to. And he's just kind of babbling and saying things and making promises that he hasn't even thought about if he can keep them. The image works. But what's also interesting is that word to tremble is used, its first mention actually in the Torah is when the brothers become aware of who Joseph is and they are afraid. They tremble before him. And then, of course, throughout this, really, we have multiple mentions of dreams. So again, a lot of Joseph connections here. We have some David stuff in here as well. What do we make of this, Brent? Like, what, as you're hearing this, is this bringing anything up?
That first part of 2, do not be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. I think maybe those two things are supposed to go together.
Yes.
Because the first part initially read to me just as like a general proverb kind of thing. Don't be quick with your mouth. And that's in other places. But it seems like it's all about the utterance before God.
Yes.
Because then it goes on to say God is in heaven, you're on earth. So I need to look at this more specifically than I was before, because it just seemed like it's this general proverb thing, but it's really more about how you're approaching God.
Yes. And notice how the very first verse focuses on listening, right?
Yeah.
You need to be listening and obeying. Don't just, if you are not listening and obeying and you're offering a sacrifice to God, you are offering the sacrifice of the fool. You are King Saul thinking that he's okay, but actually he's about to get fired.
Which I guess does sort of fit with the general proverbial reading. Like, this stuff is kind of all true generally.
Yes.
But I think the exploration here is like, when you don't do those things in the context of approaching God, how does that affect things?
Yes. And that's where I think, when we're not listening, we also tend to be very impulsive with our speech, and maybe we say things we don't really mean, or we mean them in the moment, but haven't actually thought about it. We make promises that maybe we even intend to keep them, but we didn't realize that it was too much. And then later we have to go back and say, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to, which actually a couple verses later, Qohelet specifically calls out. But what I love first is this: don't be quick with your mouth or your heart, your consciousness, to bring something up, to say something in the presence of God. Like, consider your words before God. This is not your friend that you're trying to explain why you couldn't make it to watch the game last night. Like, this is God, and God is in heaven and you are on earth. So let your words be few. God sees so much more. If you're going into the presence of God, we could talk about other contexts, praying without ceasing and God being, constantly in our presence as an indwelling of the Holy Spirit. But when you're going into God's presence, remember, we started by talking about guard your feet when you go up to the house of God. Okay, you're going to the temple. Don't waste God's time. Don't say things that are frivolous. Like, be intent and mindful as you go into this space. And immediately after that, we have the dream, and it being something that comes through a lot of, it has a great task associated with it. And the voice of the fool comes through many words. What do you make of this, Brent? Because this feels a little like it's kind of in the same line where we're talking about, someone who talks too much. But now we've added this dream angle.
When there are many cares, which one is that? There's an NET for, they translate it the same way, but they have a footnote. What does this say? When there are business, affairs, tasks, occupations.
Okay, yes. So that is a word we've seen it many times. It's one of Qohelet's favorite words.
Yeah.
This is actually a word that in this form only appears in Qohelet.
Yeah.
Nowhere else in the text. And it is I'm on the wrong verse. It's the word inyan. And it is a form of the root word, I believe it's ana, which is often translated as an affliction, being humbled, being troubled, being weakened, can be used in a lot of contexts. Not all of them negative, which is why sometimes it's just associated with something you have to do, like a business thing, an occupation, a task. I like keeping the idea of affliction in the back of my head. And when we think about this in the context of Yosef, I think it becomes really clear. The way I have it translated here, that a dream comes in this affliction. So, if you are like Joseph, right, and you have a dream and it's a big dream, right? It's like, oh, everyone's bowing down to me. Do you think that dream is just going to come through like the next day? Your check's going to come in the mail and they're going to say, congratulations, you are now king of the world and we've taken care of everything. Like, no, a dream like that is going to come with a lot of hardship, a lot of work. It's a big task. And then this being paired with the voice of a fool comes through many words. Well, let's think about whether Yosef and his dreams and maybe saying too much about them affected Yosef. Because the first thing he does with these dreams and goes and tells everyone all about it.
Yeah.
And gets the ire of his brothers. And to be honest, rightly so. Those are kind of big things to be saying so lightly. We can see how that played out.
Yes. Although so Joseph is given the second garment, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
L will be mad if I say anything other than undergarment, but whatever. He's given the second thing. He is set apart as something special, out of place from what the birth order would suggest. So he already has this, and then it says he has the dream. And so I'm just thinking he's just excited, like, hey, Dad, you broke the tradition. You gave me this thing out of place, and then I had this dream and it confirmed it.
Sure. Yeah.
But how he went about it was apparently foolish enough. I mean, you could also say that it's all in God's plan. Like,
right.
He needed to get his brothers mad at him to send him down to Egypt to become, the ruler of everything and save everybody. But how do you go about it? Even if it's like a confirmation of something that you're like, oh, God is doing this thing, or God is using my dad to like set things up in this way. And I maybe it's just a misinterpretation.
Well, see, I think that it's like, I can see what you're saying. That all flows together. And we can certainly imagine a young Joseph thinking that way. But, in terms of the larger context, like it is pretty significantly different. Like being the Behor, being the next patriarch is not the same as saying everyone's going to bow to me. Like the bowing thing, and not just his brothers, but his father and his mother would bow to him. Like that was also part of the dream. So like imagine that, like, you're in a family like this and dad's playing favorites, and then that kid who's spoiled and gets everything their way and just can't do anything wrong, then comes out and says, I'm actually going to be the president of the United States. I'm actually going to be the president, and then you're going to have to do everything I say. Like, that isn't just, oh, yeah, just another thing. Like, that's taking it to another level and kind of rubbing your face in it. And not only saying, like, I'm going to go even further than how far I've already gotten, but like, oh, I have a dream that told me this. Like, I'm also special to God, and I have a special destiny and fate. Like, that's doubly, triply infuriating.
But confirmed with two separate dreams.
Well, sure, and it did come to pass.
Yeah.
I mean, even the symbolism of the dreams, right? The sheaves bowing, and it had to do with grain. But this is where it was foolish, and Joseph suffered for that foolishness. And when we compare that to how Joseph handled giving interpretations of dreams later on, we can see maybe a little bit more wisdom. Maybe he's learned some things.
Right.
I definitely think that there is something to be learned there, even though it did all work out. Like, obviously things turned out. And I think that's what colors our interpretation of those moments as like, well, it worked out, so he was right. And it's like, yeah, but maybe it also would have turned out the same way but without him being in prison or something. Like, who knows?
Yeah, how would it have played out if he had played his cards a little closer to the chest there?
Yeah, and wow, that would be a cool thing to learn. But this is reminding us of the other side of Yosef, the side that was, maybe not thinking about his words and resting on the fact that he was in a privileged position and life was going great for him. If you were in a slightly different position, you might be more careful. And in this case, David stands out more as, one who is careful when we see David conducting himself, especially around God. Like, reverence is like top of his. In fact, he sometimes seems to even be overly reverent or very public in his reverence in ways that I think demonstrate this quality to a T. Whereas Yosef does not seem, he treats this divine vision like, hey, guess what? Like, yeah, this is what happened to me. And it kind of betrays, I guess, a lack of awareness. And that's where it makes the person seem like a fool, even if the dream is 100% true.
Right.
So, and I think this is also important for us as American Christians to think about that, if we are really out here sharing the gospel, sharing something that is a world-changing, radical truth that is, like it says in John, if the darkness cannot grasp it, like, we should be more mindful of how we try and share these things and lead people to it with more considered words. Share our dreams and visions and spiritual guidance with the same kind of reverence we would if it was a careful matter that God had given us to steward, because that's exactly what it is. And with that, I want to jump into, after this, because there's a paragraph break in the middle of what we read. Then we jump to making a vow, which kind of takes the conversation in some, it's still the same direction, but it's a little bit more pointed now. Don't make a vow and not do it. It would be better to not vow than vow and not pay. Like you said, this kind of all sounds very standard wisdom literature. Makes sense. It'd be better to not stand up and, publicly look very righteous, but then not pay. It would have been better for you if you had just not said anything than one of the other people. Like, I remember this, I feel like happens all the time in Christian settings where, like, someone will be like, hey, let's pray. Does anyone want to volunteer to pray? And there's that like 15 seconds in my brain where I'm just like, okay, wait, am I in a place where I feel like praying? Do I actually, like, am I going to be a good Christian and do this? And it's like, okay, wait, no, don't do it out of obligation. Don't try and, do that. But like, am I really in a place? Can I speak for all the prayer requests here? Like, try and do that honestly. But there is that sense of like wanting to be the one that's like, yeah, I'll do it. I'll stand up and be the person who speaks for us. And obviously that's not the same as making a vow, to be clear. Like, I'm not trying to draw a parallel there,
sure,
only
yeah.
to the pressure of wanting to stand up and say, yeah, I'll do it. I'll support this new project, or I'll take care of this person. Or, you hear someone who's going through a rough time at your church and you're like, yeah, no, I'll definitely help you with this problem. And then, do we actually always follow up on that? That's a good question to think about. But specifically, when it comes to vowing something to God, that should be taken very seriously. Now, I don't think that this is like controversial or complicated. And in fact, this is almost a direct quote from Deuteronomy. If you want to look at it, Deuteronomy 23, verses 21 through 23. And it basically just says this, like, I would quote it, except it's literally just the same thing we read. It outlines the same points. Don't delay in fulfilling your vow. It would be a sin if you don't fulfill your vow. If you don't make a vow, then there's no sin. Like, literally same points. And it even specifies the point that Qohelet makes immediately after this about your lips. Like, don't let your words be the thing that causes you to sin. Like, why should it? It's so easy to just not talk.
Yeah.
It's so easy to, and I feel like that's also the advice we could say for everything going back up to the top of the chapter.
Sure.
Like, hey, Saul, just don't say anything and just listen. Hey, Joseph, just don't tell them. just take a minute and listen to what other people have to say first. Read the room and then see if you have something to say.
There is that one extra bit in the Ecclesiastes version of it, though, which is, do not protest to the temple messenger. My vow was a mistake. Why should God be angry at what you say and destroy the work of your hands? If you make a vow to God, don't delay to fulfill it. You know, he has no pleasure in fools. Fulfill your vow. It's better not to make a vow than to make one and not fulfill it. Okay, yeah, sure, great. Then it moves on to like, but don't mention it if you don't quite pull it off. Because why should God be angry at you? As if God is not going to notice that you failed to fulfill your vow unless you admit to it.
Okay, so actually, I think that verse is saying something different. So, and maybe this is a translation thing. So, one thing to note here is that the word there for temple messenger, it is literally just messenger. So the word there is malach, which means it could be read as angel. But the sense there is that it's a, if you've made a vow to God, it's usually something from the temple. So practically that makes sense. But let's say you made a vow to God privately, like in the modern day, and an angel comes down and says, hey, why don't you sell all your possessions and give them to the poor, like you said? And you said, oh, I didn't really mean that. I had, I was at a retreat. I was feeling really spiritual, and I made that vow when I was looking up at the stars praying to you. But then when I got home and I talked to my wife, I realized that like that's not really fair to her or the kids, so I just didn't do it. That's where Qohelet's advice here is don't say it was unintentional. Don't say it was a mistake. And the word that he uses there is a word used throughout, especially Leviticus, talking about different kinds of sin. This is the word for an unintentional sin. So basically he's saying, like, don't, like, if you are called out by an angel or a messenger, like, don't plead innocence. Like, that will, that's even like more insulting on another level. Like, oh, I just forgot that I made that vow or something like that. When you didn't even forget, that's even worse. Like it with all of these, that there seems to be an issue of like, now at least at this part of the chapter, the focus is on like being real and genuine. Like, actually say what you mean to say. Think about it. Don't treat this frivolously. Don't treat your sin frivolously as something that you can just brush off. Like this is big stuff. And Qohelet throughout this book is not writing some book where, every other word she's praising God. In fact, if anything, like a lot of the stuff she says about God kind of emphasizes to some extent that God has made a difficult life for us. And she's not afraid to point that out. But at the same time, like, it's because of that, because of, as she said in the next verse, rather fear God, like actually take God seriously. That is something that is very important. And when we do things like excuse our sin or make vows quickly and break them quickly, we're basically saying that we don't take God very seriously. Again, this is all so far like pretty straightforward and clear. But the question I have is, again, we've talked before about like, oh, this is weird that Qohelet's saying such like straightforward wisdom literature type stuff. Like, this is not something that I'm like, oh, this is too hot for Proverbs to put out.
What's the catch here? What's the catch?
Exactly. And I think, we are going somewhere. We started with like the importance of listening, going to be like, hey, be careful with your speech. One thing I want to emphasize here is in this verse, before we get to the verse about that goes back to dreams, as it says, don't let the specific words in Hebrew is, don't let your mouth cause your flesh to sin. And it's very specific wording there. Don't let your mouth cause your flesh to sin, which is translated as like, don't let your speech cause you to sin. It's one thing to make a mistake or to make a stupid vow, and it's another thing to actually, make God angry at you. Now, I looked for a reference for this, and there is a reference to Joseph in Genesis 37:27, So when he says, don't let your mouth cause your flesh to sin, in Genesis 37:27, we have Joseph's brothers talking about selling him off, or rather, when they decide to sell him off rather than kill him, they say, let's not do violence. This is Judah speaking in defense of Joseph. Let's not kill him because he is our own flesh. Therefore, traders pass by, they sell Joseph off. And so I wonder if what Qohelet is saying here is that our words can also cause other people to sin. And to go back to the point I was making earlier about our additional need to hear this as Christians in the modern day is, we can technically be sharing the gospel, speaking words from God's book, although, we know someone else who knows the words of God very well and quotes them at opportune moments. And we know that this can cause other people to sin. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that, in a heavenly sense shifts the blame and that people aren't responsible for their actions. But if we care about sin, then we should be careful that our words don't cause others to sin, like Joseph. What if Joseph had just seen how frustrated his brothers were and just been chill, not brought back a bad report to his dad? Maybe he's just the little smarty pants who always knows how to do things a little better. And so instead of, just going back and saying, yeah, they're taking care of the sheep, he goes back and says, yeah, they're taking care of the sheep, but they could be doing a much better job if they did this, 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 and this. I don't know if they're really trying. Anyway, I'm going to go play on my Game Boy now. Oh, good job, Joseph. You're my favorite son. Like that, it could go multiple ways. And Joseph chose a way that infuriated his brothers. And again, like I said, they were infuriated for the wrong reasons. Like they had a very good reason to be angry. That certainly doesn't justify them doing violence to their brother, certainly not murdering their brother, certainly not selling him into slavery. But could he have saved them from that sin with his words, with his mouth? And if we can save people from sin by helping them not make those mistakes, just by saying something in a less vitriolic way, in a less inflammatory way, my goodness, we should think about that. Because I see what gets posted online. I've been there. So Qohelet here is potentially not just rehashing something that is so well known it's in the dang Torah. Qohelet, I think, is adding in at first a note about how, we can cause others to sin. We can cause our own family to sin. One other thing that's very interesting is that when it talks about God destroying the work of your hands, that can also mean to be seized, that the work of your hands can be seized. And in fact, when it's used in that sense, it's almost always used in the sense of taking a pledge for a vow, like taking collateral. And that to me is very interesting, that God taking something out of our life as like collateral for a vow. Maybe this is the vow that we said to the angel, oh, I forgot about that. I meant to pay that. The checks, it must have gotten lost in the mail. Huh, that's weird. And he's like, yeah, then, then certainly you won't mind if God repossesses your car or something, like, that is what's going to happen when you when we play these games, when we are not careful with our words and the effect they have on other people, when we make promises and don't take them seriously, don't take seriously the way that even our words, something as simple and easy to control as our words, it's free to say sorry. It's free to just make a good, solid apology where we don't try and mitigate our image. And yet so often we choose to hang on to those words that could bring so much peace, like we're a greedy miser. And when we do that, like God sees that. God is not unaware of how we can hide the keys to peace and play keep away with people who we inflame with our words. And if we do that just with our words, then man, what else is the human heart capable of? This is where we are looking deeper into those sins that just seem to pop up everywhere like weeds. Let's see. Was there anything else? There might be a little bit of a reference here to Jephthah, I thought, with the whole idea of sinning your mouth, causing your flesh to sin. Like maybe there's a connection there. I don't know. Didn't seem very strong to me, but
Yeah, certainly in a thematic sense, I would say it fits.
Yes.
If nothing else.
And we're, learning all this, on one sense, very basic, but also a very kind of nuanced progression of looking at how we listen, how we speak. And interestingly, Qohelet keeps bringing it back to God. And I am interested to see where we go from here. Let's go ahead and read the next couple verses.
If you see the poor oppressed in a district, and justice and rights denied, do not be surprised at such things. For one official is eyed by a higher one, and over them both are others higher still. The increase from the land is taken by all. The king himself profits from the fields.
Oh, very good. And I kind of dig on that translation. There are a couple things. I like the addition of the one official is eyed by another. That's a really cool way to translate that. So diving right into looking at the details of the translation, because these two verses, particularly the second one, verse 9, there is a lot of confusion over how to translate them. When I sent this to Elle to get her official opinion, she was like, I don't know. If you translate it literally, it's this. And it was just the most garbled sentence of all time. It is very tricky to find out, who is what. And anywho, so there is something going on here. We shift now to talking about oppression, the thing that, we were kind of building to. And what I love about this is that, Qohelet kind of jumps back to her own perspective of having witnessed this. She says, if you see this, if you see oppression, and if you see, no justice, no righteousness, don't be surprised. Like going back to these things that in the previous two chapters, she was like, I saw this. And I was like, what the heck? How can we say that we're any different from animals? Now she's saying, don't be surprised. Don't be surprised. This is the norm. This is how the sausage gets made, honey. Just don't be such a rube. Don't be naive. But when we start picking apart the logic here, it becomes a very interesting statement. So don't be shocked, because one official watches over another, and there are people higher than them. So there is this chain of command. There's a hierarchy. Now, what does this have to do with the first point? Not our normal Greek syllogistic linear logic. Let me start by asking this. If there's oppression of the poor, and there's a denial of justice, and there's no righteousness, who's doing that?
I mean, I guess the most direct officials to those people.
Yeah. If you're not getting justice, it's a judge or a law enforcement officer or something. Like, they're the ones who get to decide what justice is. So if it's being denied, it's going to be those officials, and if not them, then those higher than them. And, it's all interconnected. But if we just focus on the most basic level of this, like, I don't know, someone's ripping off their customers or something like that, we might think like, wait, isn't the chain of command supposed to like stop that? Like, isn't this hierarchy supposed to put an end to those sorts of things? Why? Especially because the word there that's used is shomer. One official shomers over another. That's where I like the idea of it's eyed by. Like, it has this sense of like, oh, they're being watched. Their higher up has an eye on them. So this would seem, on first glance, at least the way our institutions are professed to being run, or how they're intended to be run, hierarchy, checks and balances, it's all supposed to keep these sorts of abuses from happening. But Qohelet is emphasizing that it's not just, the person in power, but there's a person in power over them and a person in power over them, and then seems to shoot all the way up to the king.
That's what makes it so weird. It's like, are they saying there's no incentive for anybody to provide justice? Because at the end of the day, everybody above them Like there's no real accountability.
Yeah.
The incentive structure is all wrong.
Yeah. I think that's a great way of putting it. But I would say that there's, let's flip it this way. Like if we want to put this linearly, then we have to start with the king, right? And I love the way your translation put it. That, even what was it? Even the king profits from the field or something like that.
Yeah. And there's quite a footnote on this in the NET where they give you like 4 different ways that this gets translated. So, of course, no easy answers.
Yes. So, oh, right. I forgot about this, that L showed me something really interesting here.
Oh, easy answer after all?
No, not quite an easy answer, but it supports my theory.
Okay.
Is at the beginning of verse 9, we have the word yitron. It is the yitron of the eretz, the earth, in everything. The king is served by the field. So let me put it to you this way. If you are an ancient farmer and you're getting, stepped on by the man, you're getting overtaxed and all that, and, it's coming from the king. Maybe it's even coming from King Solomon. And you say, gosh, that guy, he's got all the gold in the world. Why does he keep trying to wring every cent out of me? Like, I'm just a farmer. What does he care about, how I do this or that in my fields? And what Qohelet is saying here is, ultimately, even the king needs the field. It's the yitron of the earth. It's the abundance of the earth that is in everything. And so even though you may think like, hey, why am I getting stepped on? I'm just a nobody. Like, I'm not trying to cause any trouble or anything. But it's that, well, if the king needs extra, that's where he's gonna get it from. And that same logic flows down the whole line. They're going to look for extra from the place where they can get it, which is lower than them on the food chain. And at some point, it all comes back to what we can pull out of the ground. So don't be surprised. Like, yeah, they're going to oppress the poor because those are the people that are easy to oppress. We don't write movies about or books or stories about people who like rip off the poor. We write stories about Robin Hood, and we write stories about heists and, ripping off big powerful people. Like, that is an interesting story. There's some danger and challenge there. Going to a bunch of people that are, working 3 jobs and are just overtired and malnourished and all those things. Like, that is just sad to see. Because then there's nothing compelling about it narratively, because it's just sad. There's nothing to it. It's very easy. So don't be surprised. And again, like, then we look back at what was said in the first verse about the official and the official over them. And it's not just that there's no incentive to put in to do things more righteously, but it's that, if we think about like the whole tax collector system in Jesus's time, there was not only a incentive for tax collectors to cheat the people they're collecting taxes from, i.e. taking more than they actually needed to, but that was also literally just how they made their profit. Like, that, or not even profit, how they made like their own wage is you get whatever is left over after you give us what we need. And I'm guessing the guy who's above them probably inflates how much he needs. And because the guy above him inflates it, so I got to do it. It's just cost of doing business, man. I'm just another middleman, right? I just need to add a little bit on top so I can have some margin.
Yeah, we're looking at least 4 people between the king and the oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have the official and then the higher one. And then it says others, plural, are higher still. And then it gets to the king.
Yes.
That's a lot of middle management.
And if each of them gets a cut, that the savings are not passed down. They say, we'll pass the savings on to you. No, that's not what happens. The costs get passed on to you. I say here as it's like literally not prohibitively expensive, but it's, you got to watch how many eggs you eat. we're changing up our breakfast menus in the Bossé household. And we're very comfortable financially, but it's I'm not saying I'm too poor to afford eggs, but it's just like, dang, let's not eat eggs every morning like we usually do.
Yeah. It wasn't yeah.
All that to say, like, there is this whole discourse on how we can ignore God and protect our own image, our own well-being, and just with our words, just with something as ephemeral and, relatively meaningless, or not meaningless, but, trivial. So like, it doesn't take a lot of time or money to just, not say something or say something. Listening is free. Talking to people is free. But we will hurt other people with our words, and we will withhold words that could free them, that could ease their spirit, that could help them to avoid wrongdoing. We'll even do that to God. Qohelet reminds us, we will even sin against God with our speech. And if we'll sin over something as paltry as words, then why should we be surprised when something that has much more consequences, like having enough money in our bank account, we'll definitely sin over that. And if it's not God, but someone we don't know, then how much more willing are we? And this is where the beauty of Qohelet's argument kind of snaps into focus, where it's just like, we've seen people make really dumb mistakes just with what they say. So how much more willing are we to do evil when it actually gives us a direct material benefit, and it's people who don't have any power over us? So don't be surprised when you see it. Like, it is the natural course of things when there is a hierarchy, when there is someone with power and someone without power. It's gonna happen. And again, we are talking about what happens beneath the sun. Qohelet is not speaking with the knowledge of Christ and the Holy Spirit in her heart. So, we could say this and hope that things would be different now, but unfortunately, that is not as true as I wish it was. And in fact, yeah, I'm not going to say anything else about that. I'm going to say, Brent, do you have any more thoughts?
I'll say what maybe not quite what you're holding back, but just the idea of corruption in general. It's so easy to be corrupt because a lot of times it's just somebody above you is corrupt and you have to do corrupt things just to survive.
Absolutely.
Because they're taking more than they're supposed to. And so you have to find a way to make that work. And a lot of times that ends up leading to your own corruption. Even if that's not really what you would want to do, then you're also thinking well, I got to take care of my family. I'm just doing what I have to do to survive. And you justify it. And that doesn't make it right either. But it's just, when one part of the system gets corrupt, it's so easy for the whole thing to devolve into corruption.
Oh, absolutely.
And we see it everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad you put it in those terms and kind of brought us back down to earth. This reminds me of, I may have even shared this story on the podcast. So stop me if I've shared this before, Brent. When I was at my lowest was when I was working at a call center in northern Idaho. It was a very bad job. And what was worse about it was I worked for a internet phone company, and I worked in a department that was both customer service and sales simultaneously, which means a customer, 90% of my calls are a customer calling and saying, hey, something doesn't work, or hey, my bill is too much, or hey, you said you would do this, but you didn't. And then I would help them as best I can. And also I was obligated by my job to try and sell them DirecTV and upgrade their plan and all those things. I had a sales quota to meet, even though most of my calls were people who were already paying too much and were trying to get help for something someone else had done. And then over time, your managers, they also get on your case if you're on the phone for more than 8 minutes. Actually, I think it was 8 minutes and 50 seconds. They had it timed. And if you were on the phone longer than that, you had a manager behind you saying, hey, what's taking so long? Then on top of that, every now and then, managers would say, hey, here's a little trick to, get someone to add a package to their plan that maybe they aren't aware that you could give them a cheaper package, but, this and this, little tricks to just, not lie, not do anything strictly unethical, but, when you have literal quotas to meet and no way to fulfill them, it, exactly like you said, it pushes you to say, oh, maybe I do lie, maybe I do trick this person into getting something they don't want. And then that poor little old lady or single mother of 4 calls up 3 months later saying, why do I have a $2,000 bill? This wasn't what I talked to the person about. And the cycle goes on, and that is the reality. Thanks for giving us that transition, Brent.
I know I've heard you tell that story before, but I don't know if it was on the podcast or not, so I didn't stop you.
Well, there we go. Now it's in the record twice. Yep, there are human beings on the other side of the customer service line, and their job sucks. Just know that.
The matter must be confirmed by 2 witnesses.
Yes. And like we know from Joseph, sometimes it's 2 dreams that are the same dream. Wow. All right, let's keep going. We got to keep pushing. We got a chunk of the text left.
Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owners except to feast their eyes on them? The sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether they eat little or much. But as for the rich, their abundance permits them no sleep. I have seen a grievous evil under the sun, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners, or wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when they have children there is nothing left for them to inherit. Everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and as everyone comes, so they depart. They take nothing from their toil that they can carry in their hands. This too is a grievous evil. As everyone comes, so they depart. And what do they gain since they toil for the wind? All their days they eat in darkness, with great frustration, affliction, and anger.
Wow. Pretty straightforward, right? Like, this isn't one of those where it's like, wait, where is she going with this? What's her thought process here? Like, this is very self-explanatory, and honestly, there's not a ton I have to add here. The one thing I want to mention, there are 2 times that phrase, a grievous evil. In my translation, it says a sickening evil, but the root word there is it has the sense of something that wears you down. So this is talking about, an evil that isn't just some big calamity happens to you, but it erodes your mental health. We can all picture that. And we have these 2 images. The first one being someone that has guarded their wealth, and I think in this sense, actually, first, let's jump back, because I feel like wealth in the modern day is a little different to talk about than wealth in this time. So in verse 11, I think, when good things increase, so do those who consume them. And this is true today, but even more true back then, because if you have goods that make you wealthy back then, we're talking about actual stuff. You have lumber, you have cloth, you have a harvest. And it's not just a bank account that can hold infinite amounts of money. If you have too much grain, well, now you have to build another storehouse, and you have to pay people to watch that storehouse and people to fill the storehouse. You're not doing it all yourself, probably. Maybe it's you and your family, because we also have to remember the not that this was universally applied, but in the Torah, like the basic idea of how their society would be structured is that, every family has their own land. Everyone is a property owner and is farming their land for their own benefit. You're not working for someone else. You don't have, like in the modern day, a work job. Like, you are all self-employed. So someone who has wealth, who has had a couple good harvests, treated their land right, and they're careful about their money, they guard it. And then that ends up being his downfall. Like, he had enough money. He thought, okay, maybe I'll do a little investing. And then instantly, boom, money gone. Oh, and I have a kid on the way. Oh my goodness. Like that. Oof. What a rough thing. I don't think this is talking about like, the 1% kind of wealth. This is talking about someone who's like, got a good thing going and they're careful about it. And then one mistake and their life just falls apart bit by bit. This being paralleled, that exactly as a person is born, so he will die. What I think is Qohelet is showing here is really, more than anything, she's pulling apart our relationship to wealth and money, which, based on the argument she made in the first half about like how massively consequential our words can be for righteousness and justice, how much more therefore when we have an actual material interest, and then is now talking about our relationship to that material wealth. And first talks about how, if you just love that wealth, it's you're never going to be satisfied. It's empty. Why? Because, the more you have, the more you have to work at keeping it safe, whether it's from robbers or from people who want to swindle you out of it or out business you or whatever. Once you're playing the game, there's always another hand to be dealt, another new problem, another issue, and it'll keep costing you more to protect that. And this is then contrasted with rest. One of the things that Qohelet has consistently spoken highly of, that if you actually work for your money, then your rest is great, even if you don't have enough to eat. Even if you don't have enough to eat, you can at least enjoy your rest. But the wealthy and those who are specifically like chasing after wealth can't ever rest. Even their rest is like, wasted time. Think about how much that is centered in our culture. And I'm just going to move right on from that point, because then he talks about this poor person who trusted in their money, maybe, stepped out a little bit to try and, go into the big leagues, and just instantly strikes out, loses his kid's college fund. He bet way too much too early, but, he really thought his, sports bar was going to take off or whatever it was. The recession hits, boom. He's got nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he's even losing his house, and they have another kid on the way. What a sickening evil. And the sickeningness of it is, like I said before, that idea of the grievous evil is something that is like, it wears you down. Now, the specific situation he talks about here, that guy, the evil thing that happened to him happened all at once. He had all this wealth and it ended up betraying him, because then, when he goes into this bad business, all of a sudden it's gone. That isn't a like grinding down sort of thing. To me, that wearing away sort of irritating evil is the thing behind it. It's that love of wealth that pulls you into that position where, hey, you had a nice thing going. You had a house that was, good enough for your family. You were, you had enough in savings. Like, you could have been fine, but you got tricked by this narrative into trying to go for something bigger, get your American dream, get your slice of the pie, even though you already had enough. Oh, like seeing that really just wears you down, even if it's not your friend, even if it's not your brother who did that. It's still just makes you really sick to your stomach. And then this transitions to the image of returning as he came, naked from his mother's womb, naked at the end, taking nothing of the fruit of his labor. Now, this seems to be a more overarching thing, because this is true for everyone. We all, our clothes will, even if we're all dressed up in our caskets, that won't last for long. At the end of the day, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And what was all that fighting and striving for? So, and this is something that you read over. I'm wondering if you noticed it. There's something very strange, very novel for Qohelet in verse 16.
Ooh.
It should jump out to you. It's not a subtle thing.
Toiling for the wind.
Toiling. What was the preposition there?
Toil for the wind.
Toil for the wind. Now, how do we usually...
For the wind.
For the wind.
Oh. Huh.
And this sentence starts off with another familiar image, or rather the question, Ma Yitron. What is the extra? What is the remnant?
Yeah.
What is the something more that comes from this this lust for wealth, this desire to make it big, to add some zeros and some commas to your bank account. What is really left over? Like you said, you can't take it with you. And by being like, you could be so focused on wealth that you actually lose it all. You know, how many people lost it all because they tried to play the stock market or flip houses or whatever and got underwater and then lost it all? Like they would have been better to just keep their money, you know, keep it in a bank account, live a normal life. So what is the advantage? And this is, I think, where that the phrase that sticks out, who labors for the wind, who, and that word there for labor is is that struggle word, amal, who struggles for the wind in service of the wind. And normally Qohelet talks about trying to shepherd the wind, trying to, you know, in kind of in this very Qohelet way of wanting to live in this wise way, wanting to, you know, just even the normal human desire to control outcomes, even when they can't be controlled.
Right.
But in this case, like the wind as this kind of chaotic force that insofar as it's very unpredictable, right? That's why the image of shepherding wind is so ironic and poignant, is because it's completely impossible. It's like I said before, it's like, you know, we say herding cats, herding the wind is doubly impossible, infinitely more impossible. So to be laboring for the wind is like you're kind of like leaning into that chaos and like laboring for it. Like you're loving that things are so unpredictable and anything could happen at any moment. And that, of course, includes you losing everything and not being able to pass anything off to your kids. So then it's here kind of ties it up neatly, like this love of money that, you know, we kick off this this whole portion with. That I feel like is what Qohelet is referring to by laboring for the wind. And then what does that lead to? Even if, you know, we're looking at a person who hasn't lost it all, who is still, you know, riding the wave and seeing success and hoarding wealth and everything's going good for them. And he's, you know, oppressing and exploiting and just doesn't really think about it because that's how the bills get paid. That's how money gets made. And what does Qohelet say? All his life he eats, which we have to remember, eating is Qohelet's image for enjoying life, enjoying God's blessings. He eats in darkness with great irritation, sickness, and anger. And I don't even think this needs any explaining. Like, it feels very obvious. Like, yeah, it's hard to enjoy anything when everything is a matter of, you know, this is zero sum. How could I get more?
Yeah, and that kind of calls back to that earlier idea of eating. The sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether they eat little or much, but as for the rich, their abundance permits them no sleep. Presumably they're eating much. Again, later on, presumably they are eating much, but they're doing so in darkness, and so they're just frustrated.
Yeah, and honestly, like, all of those images are really interesting to me, and I wish I could break it down more, but we got to press on here. Qohelet's made her point, and it's a great point.
Okay. This is what I have observed to be good, that it is appropriate for a person to eat, to drink, and to find satisfaction in their toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life God has given them, for this is their lot. Moreover, when God gives someone wealth and possessions and the ability to enjoy them, to accept their lot and be happy in their toil, this is a gift of God. They seldom reflect on the days of their life, because God keeps them occupied with gladness of heart.
Mm-hmm. A conclusion we have heard many times from Qohelet, and will hear many more times. Enjoy what God's given you, if God's even given you the ability to enjoy it. And if you have more than others, which I would say, you know, in the same spirit of Brent saying, presumably they're eating much. Presumably, if you are listening to this podcast, you are doing better than most people. Maybe not. I mean, of course, here in America, everyone has access to a podcast, but you know, you can be poor and oppressed and listen to a podcast, of course.
Yeah, I don't know, dude. I feel like the proliferation of smartphones is pretty much worldwide.
It's true. It's true. But I would say that nevertheless, the likelihood of you listening to this podcast and I mean on a global level, I don't think people working in mines in Africa are listening to the Bema podcast.
I mean, who knows? Who knows?
Who knows? That would be really cool if we have listeners there. Shout out, you are seen, and we pray for you. But presumably, we are all in. Can understand, especially now with the internet and everything. We can understand more broadly our position, and that we do have significant wealth just by accident of where we're born and what we have access to. And if you have the time to listen to a in-depth Bible nerd podcast, you probably have the ability to enjoy it. And that is, again, that is the call to rest of Bema. And even that is the gift of God. But now, this very last verse has the final little fun nuance. Did you catch anything in there that reminded you of anyone? I'll read it again while I give you some time to think. He will not often call to mind the years of his life because God keeps him busy with the joy of his heart.
I'm not quite grabbing anything specifically, but I'm going to assume it's Joseph.
Yes, it is Joseph. And it's a little bit more obscure of a one. It is when he is naming his children. His firstborn is named Manasseh. He says, because God has made me forget all my trouble of my father's household.
Yep.
I think that is the image here of Joseph. Again, kind of deconstructing the myth of the hero. Like it was God who allowed Joseph to have his story turn out good and not become the story of a fool who talked too much about his dreams. But also God's the one who gave him the space and the opportunity to enjoy it. Not everyone is able to do that. Some people, chase that American dream and burn out and crash out and don't get to enjoy a second of it. Many people, have a lot of blessings they don't even acknowledge. And I think this is a really good way for us to, one, think about our own relationship to wealth and God's provision, and to also really consider how subtly and smoothly sin and not just sin, but sin that is part of the root system of oppression can be present in things as small as our words and our own attitude toward others and our own the things that we can enjoy. And what's really cool about this is this means, that we don't have to do some puritanical, kind of Gnostic, ascetic, punish your flesh so that you aren't attached to money or things like that. God does not ask that of us. God says, enjoy it. Enjoy the things you have so that they don't become idols, so that they don't become something that you look at more than people. Because as Qohelet reminds us, at some point there's only so much we can enjoy, and at some point it just becomes something that, like your translation says, it can be a feast for the eyes. You're only enjoying it abstractly. In theory, there is no real enjoyment and no life to be had there. Don't struggle for the wind. Don't work for the wind. That is as far from the goodness of God as you can get, at least in the areas we've talked about today. So anyway, that is the episode for today. Pretty straightforward. You got any final thoughts, Brent?
No, I agree. It's there's a lot here that's just good advice. It's kind of surprising to me, actually, after having gone through this with such detail, that these passages are not more common than I think they tend to be.
It's a lot of good stuff in here. It's a great book.
All right. Well, we'll leave it at that. Listeners can go to BearmontDiscipleship.com to find details about our show. Check out the news page for the latest things that we have going on. We do Q&As almost every month. We have various places that mostly Marty's going to, but occasionally I show up at a place, or, you know, maybe you'll see some of the other people there. But all of that is found on the website. You can check your podcast app for any show notes. I don't know if we have a whole lot today. I might throw in that Rebecca St. James song that I mentioned. I'm going to double check. I really think that it's from this passage, but I'm going to double check that. So maybe if it's missing, you'll know, like, oh, I completely misremembered it, and it's not entirely wrong. But yes, all of that is there. So thank you for joining us on the Bearmont Podcast today. We'll talk to you again soon.